So, Kenya, I'll start with you. You bravely shared your story. Can you talk about what some of the resources and services were available to you that helped to assist you during that time of need?
It's interesting.
Or the lack of?
Yes, I'm glad you said that. It's interesting that you say that, because we were involved with a lot of resources in the community that basically let us fall through the cracks. My son has Asperger's syndrome, and he was acting out quite a bit at school and at home, and I went the route of DJJ, getting involved, and so we had IFI coming through our home 3 times a week.
What are the acronyms?
Intensive Family Intervention. So there were 3 counselors coming in our home 3 times a week to help us with his behaviors and control his behaviors. He was very violent, probably because of some of the things that he saw his father do, or my ex-husband. But the bottom line is they were in our home and they saw certain things go on. There was one incident where my son had to go to the hospital. He was in crisis and he didn't want to go to the hospital. And the counselor was there. And my ex-husband and my son got into an altercation. They were physically fighting in the street. My husband was beating my son, trying to push him into his truck to get him to the hospital. And I turned to her and I said, I need help, And she never called the police. She never reported it, never gave me any resources to turn to. Someone, I want to say a friend of mine, told me about filing a protective order. I think it was my friend Kelly. Yes, so she had done some research, not from any counselor, but a friend of mine said, hey, you can get a TPO. But there were several times the sheriff was called out to our house and they didn't do anything to help us because I didn't have any bruising on me. Well, he says he didn't do anything, you say he did, so there's nothing we can do about it. There was a time I went to file a protective order and another friend of mine went with me and can attest, Jackie went with me, and the lady was typing something at her computer and she just kind of turned and looked, said, may I help you? And I said, well, I'm here to file a protective order. She said, you got an address? I said, no, there's nothing I can do to help you then. She turned right back around and started typing on her computer. Didn't come forth, didn't talk to me, didn't hand me any resources. The number of resources I received for domestic violence occurred when I was in the hospital bed. They handed me this whole book on counseling and all types of stuff, and I went, really? All the times that I went through DJJ and they were there, going to the district attorney's office, nothing at all. And that's one of the things, like I will go and speak to task forces and things like that, because it's important for us as advocates and people that work in that arena to realize that every person is an individual. And I know I understand burnout and things of that nature, but you have to treat every person as an individual, even if you can't issue that protective order. Sweetie, here's something else I can offer you. Here's a crisis number if it occurs again. Here's this or that. Offer something. And it's not just then that I notice it. Even now as an advocate, I notice it with women that I help. They've called several places, and you have no idea the courage it takes to make one phone call, to run on that wall. A lot of times you just want to say, okay, that's it. I'm not going to get any help. So I could go on, but we didn't receive the services we needed.
Wow. Aparna, you're involved with this. Well, you talked about a lot of the communities that your agency supports. What are some of the challenges or opportunities that you're seeing as relates to the services and programs?
Yeah, one of the things, of course, is, if you're undocumented, you don't have immigration status, you're more fearful in calling the police and you're afraid. And we're in a state that has its statewide immigration law, so that's caused more fear in immigrant communities. Language is another piece, but even knowing the resources. When you even see faith-based outreach, it's usually churches. How often do you see gurdwaras? Y'all all saw the lovely woman who did the prayer during lunch? She's from a gurdwara. She's of the Sikh faith, right? And there was a murder-suicide that occurred in that community. And one of the reasons I had her do the prayer was because of that faith-based institution's commitment to have us come in after an entire family had died and have us talk about the issues, right? And that commitment is really powerful, but how often, and she was leaving here because there's been a number of suicides in that community, and she's like, I didn't even know half these resources existed. So, when we talk about taking it to the streets, part of our theme was, are we making sure we're getting the information to the right places? Is it only certain faith communities that get the information? Is it only certain communities that get this information? How do we make sure everyone has access to what's in the community? Is it in their language? Even when we translate documents, it's a lot of times in this legalese and high level words, and the folks who need it can't access it because they don't even understand what it's saying. So really, part of it is the challenges, and I heard this at the end of the luncheon, was it's all of our responsibility to do this work. We all have to create access and be that bridge to help survivors, because a lot of times they may not feel comfortable going to their workplace. They may not feel comfortable calling a shelter. They might be scared because they think they're going to end up deported. They're afraid people won't understand their language, and they may not know the resources. A lot of survivors, even though they may have immigration status here, they've been told by their abusers that I'm going to get you deported. And because you're not a citizen, the courts aren't going to be on your side. So there's this story that they're holding on to that is not a truth, and that limits them from getting help and taking the steps they need to. So we have to make sure people know what's available to them. We have to make sure that they know that they have access to language. Like if they're calling a hotline, they're supposed to get an interpreter. And even when they're going to the courts, they're supposed to get an interpreter. Those are all part of our laws, and if they're not getting it, that's limiting. And we know that there's many times where you might have police officers that won't get an interpreter, so you don't get the story down right. And they listen to the abuser. Oh, yes. So there's this whole thing of us really being educated so that when we see folks not doing their jobs, that we can actually hold them accountable and say, look, she's actually supposed to get an interpreter, and you have the funds to do that, and it's against federal law for you not to provide those interpreters. So those are the things that I would want community members to know and get out there so that more survivors can come forward. Because a lot of times it's a friend that's calling. Mm-hmm. 9 times out of 10, it's a friend calling on behalf of someone else to kind of filter out our services and make sure that we'll be able to help them.
It's very valid points, and you talk about community. So Priscilla, can you talk a little bit about what can we as a community do to help victims or those that are experiencing domestic violence?
What I would say in regards to community, be not there just to be a consolable, be there to just also listen. Because sometimes when people come to you, can you just listen to me? Mm-hmm. Don't come be criticizing, well, you should have, why did you stay? You should have left. You should have let him did this to you. Okay, at that moment, you don't need to hear that. You need to hear, I got something going on. I need to talk to you about it. Can you just listen and help me to get through this? And once I come to a point where I understand that where I am, then help me to get to that place where I need to be. Because when you're at that moment, your main thing is, especially when you have children, is your safety. And for you and your child. You could be not concerned about anything else. But you don't need to, you should have did this, no. But be there and be as supportive to them as you possibly can. Whether it's through a friend, a confidant in your church, even some of your family members. Some you may can talk to and some you may not. But find you somebody that you can rely on and just put your trust in them. And they will listen. The main thing is just listen and be there, and then be that support person for them.